B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Irovin Daf Chof. We're going to start on the very top line. We're in the middle of the various questions that Abaya asked Rabbah regarding the Pasei Birois. When and how one was allowed to use this special leniency the Chachomim made, that if you want to be able to draw water from a well, which in and of its own has the status of Reshus HaYochid, in an area that's surrounding the well is Reshus HaRabim, you have to enclose an area around this well that it should have a status of a Reshus HaYochid. In order to do that, and you couldn't just put up walls in the middle of Reshus HaRabim, so the Chachomim allowed us to use diyumdin, which are posts on each of four corners, and providing that the area between each post is not too wide, then they were allowed to carry within this post. And we said that the animals that are in this post, that are within these posts, that are within this enclosed area, have to be at least 2 amos, which means that the head and most of the animal has to be within the enclosed area when you're giving it to drink. That's what we saw in the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek. Says the Gemara, Boy minei Abaya mi Rabbah. Abaya asked Rabbah the following question: Chotzer sheroisha nichnas lebein hapasim. These posts are called pasim, boards. What happens? It's normally we're talking about that these corners, this enclosed area, is in the middle of Reshus HaRabim, and in the center of it, or somewhere within the area of these pasim, you've got a well. What happens if on one of the sides of these pasei birois, on one of the sides, the opening, which according to one man d'Oma is not allowed to be more than 10 amas, according to another man d'Oma it's not allowed to be more than 13 and a third. But what happens if in this opening between one corner post and the next, you actually have an opening into a chotzer? Mahu letaltel mitoicha lebein hapasim. Are you allowed to carry from the chotzer into the area between these pasim, or not? Umi bein pasim letoicha, and are you allowed to carry from the area between the pasim into the chotzer? In the event that the usage within these pasei birois is considered similar to that of a chotzer, then it's considered one chotzer being flashed with another chotzer. You're not allowed to carry from one chotzer to the other unless you make an eruv chatzeris. However, if the usage in these pasei birois is not considered as a significant usage, then it's just considered a regular Reshus HaYochid. It has its leniencies with the way the walls are made, but it's considered a Reshus HaYochid, and you can carry from there into the chotzer and vice versa. That was Abaya's question. Answers the Gemara, answers Rabbah, Omale mutter. Rabbah said it was mutter, you're allowed to carry from the area between these boards and the chotzer and vice versa. Shtayim mai. What happens if you have 2 chatzeris, one adjacent to the other, next to each other, with a wall going in between them, and the end of these 2 chatzeris are between these pasim? Are you also allowed to carry between the chotzer and the area between the pasim and vice versa? Shtayim mai. Omalei, Rabbah answered to Abaya, Osir. In this case, it will be Osir to carry from the chotzer, from either chotzer, into the area between the pasim and vice versa. Omar Rav Huna, Shtayim asurim. When you have 2 chatzeris that are open to this area, bein hapasim, it's also vafilu irvoi. Even in the event that the 2 chatzeris, in and of themselves, they had an eruv chatzeris. Because we've already seen a little bit, there's 2 different concepts of an eruv chatzeris. One idea of an eruv chatzeris is that all the homes within one chotzer have to make an eruv to become one, and then they can all carry in the chotzer. Another type of eruv chatzeris is if you have 2 chatzeris that are next to each other, then in order to carry from one chotzer to the next, you have to make an eruv chatzeris. One of the conditions to be able to do that is that you have an opening, a significant sized opening, a door or window, between one chotzer and the next. If you have such an opening, then you can make an eruv chatzeris and carry from one to the other. So Rav Huna said that even if the 2 chatzeris had a substantial and significant opening, and they made an Eiruvei Chatzeris between them, and now for all intents and purposes, as far as the halachas of carrying are concerned, the two Chatzeris are considered a single Chatzer. Nonetheless, Rav Huna says you're not allowed to carry from this Chatzer, these Chatzeris, into the area between the Pasim and vice versa. Why did he say that? Gezerah Shema Yomru Eiruv Moil Lebein HaPasim. One of the fundamental differences between Eiruvei Chatzeris and Shitufei Muvois is that when you have two Chatzeris that both open up into a Movui, then the two Chatzeris can join up by doing Shitufei Muvois. That means the very fact that there's a single Movui serving both Chatzeris, you can make a type of an Eruv similar to Eiruvei Chatzeris, but it's called Shitufei Muvois. But that you can only do if you have a Movui. If you don't have a Movui, it's just two Chatzeris next to each other, you have different conditions. There, we need to have a significant opening between the two Chatzeris. Over here, Rav Huna says that we're afraid that people are not going to know that there's an entrance between the two Chatzeris. They're going to think this is similar to two Chatzeris that are independently open into a shared area which is between the Pasim, and the reason, in the event that we would allow them to carry from the Chotzer into this area, people will think that the area between the Pasim is similar to a Movui. In the same way as a Movui, if you have two Chatzeris entering the same Movui, you can make a Shitufei Muvois, people will think that this area between the Pasim has the halachas of a Movui. Proof being that the people of the two Chatzeris can carry from the Chotzer into the Movui and vice versa. And we know that's a serious mistake, because a Movui, we know that it has to be longer more than it's wide, and there are other halachas that, and it mustn't be mefulosh, it mustn't go straight through, it has to be walled on at least three sides, and in these pasei birois, it's not walled on three sides, it goes straight through. So it would be very bad if people thought that this has the halachas of a Movui, and people will not know that the reason that the two Chatzeris are considered one is not because the area between the Pasim is called a Movui, rather because there's an entranceway between the two Chatzeris and they made Eiruvei Chatzeris. People might not see that entrance and think that it's because the area between the Pasim is a Movui. Therefore, Rav Huna said that you cannot carry from these Chatzeris into the area between the Movui. Shema Yomru Eiruv Moil Lebein HaPasim. People will think that the Eiruvei, that an Eiruv works with the area between the Pasim similar to a Movui, and that will be a mistake. Rava says no. Rava says Irvoi, if they made an Eiruvei Chatzeris between them because there's a significant entranceway between the two Chatzeris, then the two Chatzeris are considered one entity, one Rishus, and then Mutter. Then they can carry from that now merged Chotzer into the area Bein HaPasim, and vice versa. We're not worried that what people are going to think. Omele Abaye leRava. Abaye brought proof to Rava. Tanya de Masayaloch. I've got a brisa that seems to be proved to agree with what you're saying. Chotzer sharoisha echod nichnas lebein HaPasim. If you have a Chotzer whose opening opens into the area between the Pasim, you can carry from the area between the boards and the Chotzer and vice versa. If there are two Chatzeros opening into this area, Osir, then it's Osir, because then you have two different Rishuyas, two different Chatzeros, people from two different Rishuyas. They're both Rishus HaYochids, biblically speaking, but they're both going to be sharing the area between the Pasim. That's Osir. You need some type of an Eruv. And you can't use Shitufei Muvois because it's not a Movui. So therefore, Shtayim is Asa. Bameh Devarim Amurim, says the Brisa, when is it true that if there's two Chatzeros opened between the Pasim, that neither of them are allowed to carry from the Chotzer to the area Bein HaPasim and vice versa, is only Shaloi Irvoi, if they between themselves didn't make an Eruv. Aval Irvoi, if the two Chatzeros made an Eruv together, thanks to the area, to the opening between the two Chatzeris, then Mutarim, they are together considered a single Chotzer, and they can carry to the area between the Muvois, like like Rava said, not like Rav Huna. Asks the Gemara, maybe this brayso you just brought is actually a refutation on what Rav Huna said. Rav Huna said that when you have two chatzeros, you cannot carry under any circumstances into the area between the pasim. Says the Gemara, no. Rav Huna will answer you, Hasam de Hodron ve'irvon. There is a case where you have two chatzeros, that they're both opening into the area bein hapasim, and nonetheless, even Rav Huna will agree that they can carry in the area bein hapasim. And that is when it's crystal clear and self-evident to everybody who's looking at these chatzeros that the two chatzeros have made or are able to make an Eiruve chatzeros. Not because there was some doorway in between the two chatzeros that maybe people didn't see. Rather, at some point, and there's a machlokas in the Rishonim, if it was right at the beginning of the chatzeros, near where the Bein HaPasim, or if it's right at the end of the chatzeros, but there was a proper recognizable breach between the two chatzeros, and since there was a proper opening which everybody could see between the two chatzeros, everybody will know that the reason that they can carry is because they made an Eruv chatzeros based on that opening. And since everybody can see that there's such an opening which allows them to make their own private Eruv chatzeros, therefore everybody will understand why they can carry into the area Bein HaPasim and will not think that the area Bein HaPasim is considered a Mavui. But when you don't have a Hodron ve'irvon, you don't have a very clear opening between the two chatzeros, and you just have a doorway, some place in between, then Rav Huna says people will not see this doorway. They'll think that they're carrying into this area because this area is considered a mavui. That will be a mistake, and therefore it's asa. Continues the Gemara, the next question Abaye is asking Rabba. Boye minei Abaye mi Rabba. Yovshu mayim b'Shabbos mahu. We know that the purpose of making these posts around the well was that the oilei regolim, or the animals of the oilei regolim, could drink from the water without transgressing the issa of carrying from the well, which is the Rishus HaYochid, into the area beyond the well, which was the Rishus HaRabim. What happens if the water in the well dried up? Either it was a pit with stagnant water, we saw this in the previous sugya, or it was a well that the source of water dried out. So now you have a well with no water, nobody can drink from it. There's an area around it that's been encircled with a very big leniency. It's porotz merubah la'omed. Normally we don't let you carry and in an area that just has 4 posts, 1 on each corner. So what's the halacha? Do we say that since when Shabbos came in there was water there, and when Shabbos came in you were allowed to carry in this area, it had the status of Rishus HaYochid, therefore you can continue doing so for the entire duration of Shabbos even though there's no more water? Or do we say no? Do we say they only allowed it because there was water there, now there's no water, it's asa? That was Abaya's question to Rabba. Omerle, Rabba answered to Abaya, Klum nasis mechitza elo b'shvil mayim. The Chachamim only allowed you to relate to this type of corners as being in the place of a mechitza, as a wall, only because there was water there that you wanted to be able to drink on Shabbos. Mayim ein kan, in the event that there's no water there, mechitza ein kan, then for all intents and purposes, at least rabbinically speaking, we look at these walls as if they are non-existent and you cannot carry in that area. Boy Rovin. Rovin now asked a question. Yovshu mayim b'Shabbos. What happens if when Shabbos came in, there was water there? Sometime during the duration of Shabbos, it dried out. Ubou b'Shabbos. And then the very same Shabbos, later on, it rained again and more water came into this well. Mahu. Do we say that now that again there's water in it, you're allowed to use the area as a Rishus HaYochid? Or do we say no? Omer le Abaya. Abaya answered to Rovin, Yovshu b'Shabbos, in the event that it dried out on Shabbos and there's no water there, lo tiboy lecha. That you shouldn't have any query about that. The boy minei demar. I asked that question to my master Rabba, uposhitli de aser, and he told me it was aser. If there's no water, you cannot carry there. Bo, if the water came back on Shabbos, nami lo tiboy lecha. I suggest that even that you lay that question to rest. I'll tell you what the halacha is. The havale mechitza asuya b'Shabbos. It's as if the mechitza, because what did we say before? that the Rabbanon only consider this a mechitza because there's water there. If the water became reintroduced on Shabbos, it's as if you made the mechitza on Shabbos. What's the halacha with mechitza ha'asuya b'Shabbos? The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Kol mechitza ha'asuya b'Shabbos. Any mechitza, any partition, any wall that was made on Shabbos. Bein b'shoigeg, it doesn't matter if you did it by mistake. Bein b'mezid, it doesn't matter if you did it intentionally. Bein b'oindus, or if you had no choice, it was an oinus. Bein b'rotzoin, or you did it willingly. Shmo mechitza. It has the status of a mechitza. Here too, once the water comes back into the well, once there's water in the well, the Chachomim see this as a partition, and you're allowed to carry that. It's called a mechitza. Asks the Gemara, did Rav Nachman not say that any wall made on Shabbos has the status of a wall to the extent that it's considered, biblically speaking, as a Reshus HaYochid, and if you throw something from outside of it, from the Reshus HaRabim, into a walled area, even though it was also to make the wall on Shabbos, you will have transgressed the malacha of carrying from Reshus HaRabim into Reshus HaYochid, you'll be chayiv. But to allow you to carry based and relying on walls that you made on Shabbos when you're not allowed to make walls on Shabbos, maybe the Chachamim didn't allow you to do that. So how can you bring me proof from that brisa that you can carry within the Amudim? No, maybe it's only considered a Reshus HaYochid regarding that, biblically speaking, it's Reshus HaYochid, and if you throw something from outside into it, you'll be chayiv. But who says you're allowed to do it? L'katchila, who says you're allowed to carry that? Says the Gemara, Ki itma du Rav Nachman, amazed itmar. The only time that Rav Nachman said you're not allowed to use these walls that were made on Shabbos is if you intentionally transgress the issa of making a wall. Over here, not only did you not intentionally transgress the issa, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't make the wall. It rained, water came into the well, and as soon as there's water in the well, the Chachamim said you can associate the surrounding area as a walled-in area, as a Reshus HaYochid. You didn't do anything wrong. If you didn't do anything wrong, you're allowed to use those walls on Shabbos, even to carry in them. Continues the Gemara. Omar Rebbe Loza, Hazoyrei klebein pasei birois, chayev. If you have a well with water in it, you have these dyumdin, these corner posts around it, the area between these posts is considered a Reshus HaYochid, and therefore if you throw something from outside these posts, which is a Reshus HaRabim, into the area between these posts, chayev, you're going to be chayev chatos for transgressing the malacha of moitzi mireshus lireshus. Omalei pshita. Of course, it's a Reshus HaYochid. If it's a Reshus HaYochid, then if you carry or throw something from outside it into it, of course you're chayev. What's the chiddush? Ilav mechitzahi, if this would not be considered a mechitza creating Reshus HaYochid, heicha mishtari leile malois. How would they allow you to fill up your utensils with water and draw them out of the pit? Of course it's a Reshus HaYochid, and therefore it can be taken for granted that if you throw from a Reshus HaYochid into this area, you're going to be chayev. Loi. It's not so posh, says the Gemara. Tzricha, I need to say there's a chiddush. De'ovad ke'en pasei birois b'Reshus HaRabim. What Rebbe Loza was actually talking about was not that you had a well and you had the four corners. You're 100% right. Since the Chachamim allowed you to carry from the well into this area, of course it's a Reshus HaYochid. However, what happens if you put up four posts and there was no well here? In the middle of Reshus HaRabim, you put up these four posts. What's the halacha then? That's what Rebbe Loza was saying, that these four posts, even though there was no well here, and you're very much not allowed to carry in this area, but is it considered a Reshus HaYochid min HaTorah? So that's what Rebbe Loza was saying. Yes, there's a chiddush that it's min HaTorah, biblically speaking, even though there's no well here, it's considered mechitzos. And if you throw from Reshus HaRabim into this area, you're going to be chayev. V'zorak l'toicha chayev. Says the Gemara Honami Pshita. That's also taken for granted. Di'ilav, in the event that four posts, biblically speaking, would not create a Reshus HaYochid, even without the well, ilav de ba'alma mechitzahi, if any time using these posts, it would not make a mechitza, gabe boyer, just because there's a well in the middle of it, heicha mishtari leile tiltule. How would the Chachamim say you're allowed to carry from the well, which is definitely Rishus HaYochid, to the area around the well, which was a Rishus HaRabim, that can only be mutter if the area surrounding it, min ha'Torah, is considered a Rishus HaYochid. So if these posts do not create a Rishus HaYochid in any event, even when there's no well, then even if there is a well, it wouldn't be a Rishus HaYochid. And if the Chachamim say, when there's a well, we let you carry there, it must be min ha'Torah, it's always a Rishus HaYochid, even when there's no well. Just when there's no well, the Chachamim said, don't carry there. This is not the way to make a partition to allow you to carry there, midrabanon. If there's a well, there was a kula, a leniency, we allow you to use it as a Rishus HaYochid. But from the fact that the Chachamim allowed us to do that when there was a well there, you can take it for granted that it's called a mechitza min ha'Torah, even when there's no well. So what was the Belazar coming to be mechadish to us? Says the Gemara, loy, it's not so simple. Tzricha, there is an element of chiddush in what Rabbi Belazar said. Afal gav de kaboki barabim. We're talking about the type of corner posts that it's not that you've cornered in an area and all the people traveling through this Rishus HaRabim are going around the area, and then the area, even though it's just got 4 posts, but the Rabbim, the public, are staying away from it, and therefore we can understand it has the status of Rishus HaYochid. But what happens if the whole public are going straight through this area? You've got the 4 corner points, the 4 corner posts, and the Rishus HaRabim, all the people are just walking straight through. So logic would dictate, or we could suggest, that since the Rabbim are penetrating through the area that's got these corners, maybe it's not considered min ha'Torah. It's not considered a Rishus HaYochid. You cannot have a Rishus HaYochid where the whole Rabbim is going through it. Afagav to kaboki bo Rabbim, that's what Rabbi Eliezer was being mechadish. That even though the Rabbim, the public, are going through this, nonetheless min ha'Torah it's considered a Rishus HaYochid, and throwing from an area outside of this encircled area, from Rishus HaRabim into this area, is going to be chayev chatos. Asks the Gemara, Mike Mashmalon, what are you coming to be mechadish to us? Are you coming to teach us? The chiddush is that even if a public goes through an area that we call a walled in, a surrounded area, that nonetheless it's still called a mechitza. Rabbi Eliezer told us this already once. He doesn't need to say it here again. Where did he tell us this? Ditnan. We learned in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, what happens if the Rabbim, if the public are going through the area surrounded by these corner posts? You should make sure that, or somebody should make sure that the public go to the side and go round these posts and do not penetrate through these posts. The Chachamim said, not like the Tanakama, the Chachamim said, let the Rabbim go through it, it's fine, it's still considered a Rishus HaYochid. That was the Machlokes Tanoim in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer, here's where Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer commented on this, and they said, the Omer Tarvai, they both said, can, over here, with the Shitas HaChachomim in this Mishnah, that says that you don't need to stop the Rabbim from going through these posts, it has taught us the power of a mechitza, of a separation, of a wall. And even though it's a virtual wall, it's a wall that's relying on corner posts and it's open in the middle. Nonetheless, since it has the status, min ha'Torah, it has the status of walls, even though the Rabbim go through it, that's the power, the strength of a mechitza, that it retains its status of mechitza, even though the Rabbim are going through it. So here you have Rabbi Eliezer, who commented on the Chachamim in this Mishnah that the hoidiach hakoichon shel mechitzos, that even though the Rabbim go through it, it's still called a mechitza. So Rabbi Eliezer already said it there regarding that Mishnah with the Rabbim going through the posts. If so, why did Rabbi Eliezer have to say it again with that hazorik lepase birois? If somebody throws from an area of Rishus HaRabim outside these posts into the area with these posts, that you're chayev. He doesn't need to say the same thing twice. Says the Gemara, no. If you'd only bring me proof from Rabbi Eliezer, who commented on the Chachamim in that Mishnah, I may have thought, that when Rabbi Eliezer said that from here we see the strength of mechitzos, it doesn't mean that he himself agreed with this. It could be he himself held that since the Rabbim are going through it, it loses the status of mechitzas. Nonetheless, according to the Chachomim, who they don't hold that way, the Chachomim, the opinion of the Chachomim shows the strength of the mechitzas according to the Chachomim. But it doesn't mean that Rebbe Elazar hold of it. And that's why Rebbe Elazar had to go out of his way and tell us explicitly that Rebbe Elazar also hold of this, that even though the Rabbim are going through it, it's still considered a Rishus HaYochid, and throwing from Rishus HaRabbim into this area, you'll be chayev. Komash Malon, Kan Usvirele. That's why we needed Rebbe Elazar at the beginning of our sugya to tell us that I agree with the Chachomim, I agree that the strength of Mechitzos, that they retain their status of Mechitza even though the Rabbim go through it. And the truth is, Rabbi Yochanan, even though Rabbi Yochanan himself also, like Rebbe Elazar, commented that according to the Chachomim we see the strength of the walls, he himself doesn't hold of this. He actually holds that if the Rabbim go through these Mechitzos, they lose the status of Mechitzas. And Rebbe Elazar, we may have thought the same about Rebbe Elazar. That's why Rebbe Elazar says, no, I hold that even if the Rabbim go through it, it is called a Mechitza, and throwing from Rishus HaRabbim into this area is called carrying on Shabbos from one Rishus to the other, and you'll be chayev. Asks the Gemara, V'lei maho v'loi boyahach. So if so, why doesn't Rebbe Elazar just tell us the halacha we started with, that if you throw from an area of Rishus HaRabbim into an area enclosed by these posts, even though there's a Rabbim going through them, you chayev, it's still a Rishus HaYochid. And then we'll know that that's what you hold, and the Rebbe Elazar would not have to then have told us that from the Chachomim we see the strength of the walls. We know that you hold that's the strength of the walls. Answers the Gemara, Choda Michlal Chaver Te'itma. The truth is, Rebbe Elazar only did say it by Hazorik. Rebbe Elazar only said the quote in his name that we started with, that throwing from outside these posts, from Rishus HaRabbim into the area with these posts, even though there's a Rabbim going through it, that it does not lose the status of Mechita. That's all Rebbe Elazar said. And based on what he said, the Talmidim, they deduced from there that, like Rabbi Yochanan, he held that the strength of the walls are such that the Rabbim penetrating them do not lose its status of the walls. So when it says that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, the Omri Tarvayu hoidiach hakoichon shel mechitzos, he didn't have to tell it to us there, and he didn't tell it to us there. It was something that was learned from what Rabbi Elazar said in his previous quote. Continues the Gemara. Muta lahakriv lebe'er v'chulu. What did we see in the Mishnah? We saw in the Mishnah that you're allowed to make the posts as close to the be'er, to the well, as you want, on one condition. There's at least 2 amos all the way around the well, between the edge of the well and the area which is contained within these posts, within these corner posts, these L-shaped corner posts, in order that an animal who's drinking the water can be roishoi v'ruboi. Its head and most of its body can be within the Rishus HaYochid when it's drinking. But if the posts are closer than that, then if you take out some water from the well and put it next to the well, then when the animal is drinking from this water, it's going to be, most of the animal is going to be outside the posts in the Rishus HaRabbim, and we're going to have an issue with that. Let's see the Gemara. Tanan Hosam. We learned in a Mishnah, Lo yamoid odom b'Rishus HaRabbim v'yishte b'Rishus HaYochid. A person who's standing in the Rishus HaRabbim and he puts his head into Rishus HaYochid through a window, through a door, and he wants to drink something. He wants to hold a cup and drink in the Rishus HaYochid. His feet, he's standing in the Rishus HaRabbim. You're not allowed to do that. Neither should you do the other way around. If you're standing in the Rishus HaYochid, you shouldn't put your face, your head out of the window, out of the door, and drink in the Rishus HaRabbim. There's one condition, then you are allowed to do that, if a person's head and most of his body is in the area where the cup that he's drinking from is. If he's standing outside and he wants to drink some water inside, if his head and most of his body is in the Rishus HaYochid, then you can drink that way. What's the issue here? We're afraid that if most of his body is outside the reshus, where the cup with the drink, where his water is, he might by mistake take the cup and bring it out towards where he's standing, and then he's going to be taking out this cup from one reshus to another, which is seriously osa. But if a person's head and most of his body is in the same reshus as where the water is, we're not worried that he's going to take the water or the cup out into another reshus. V'chein begas, there's another halacha regarding maisa, that all the while that you're drinking the oil or the wine, whatever it is, in the press, then if you're drinking whilst you're still in the press, the Chachomim said it's considered an aray, a temporary type of drinking. It's not a kavua, a fixed drinking, and therefore you're not yet chayev to take maisa. But that's only if you're drinking it inside the press. What happens if you're standing outside the press and you put your head into the window, into the press, and you're drinking that way? The same halacha applies. If your head and most of your body is inside the press, it's considered that you're drinking in the press, because we're not worried you're going to take it out. If most of your body is outside, we're afraid you're going to take it out, and then you'll no longer have this leniency, and therefore you're not allowed to drink that way without taking maisrus. That's what we saw. That's a halacha that we know regarding an odom, a human being, that we know that if he's not roishay v'ruboy in the place where he's drinking, we're afraid he's going to take what he's drinking out. Gabe odom ha'omar deboya roishay v'ruboy. It's clear that you need roishay v'ruboy. Gabe poro. Here the question was, as far as the cow is concerned, mi bo'inon lo roishay v'ruboy. Now this sounds like a very interesting question, because it said explicitly in the Mishnah that we mentioned that you have to have a 2 amma gap between the edge of the boyer, and the edge of the enclosed area, in order to have room for roishay v'ruboy of the animal. So what's the Gemara asking? The Mishnah says you need roishay v'ruboy. So we have to make a short introduction, and then the rest of this omud will be smooth sailing. We're not really concerned if the animal himself, however he does that, if the cow takes out some water or even drags out the dish from the Reshus HaYochid into the Reshus HaRabim, that is not our issue. Whenever you're trying to give an animal to drink, there are one of 4 different scenarios that could take place. You could be holding the vessel, the utensil that the animal is drinking from, or you could not be holding it. You could just put it on the ground. And in either event, you could be holding the animal in place, holding it by its collar, making sure it drinks here and doesn't move away. Or you could just be holding the vessel with the water, or not holding the vessel, but not holding the animal. So that is clear that if you're not holding the vessel, the utensil with the water in, it doesn't matter if the animal is roishay v'ruboy or not roishay v'ruboy. You as a person, as a yid, when you took out the water from this well and you put it into the utensil and you left it on the floor, make sure that the area that you put it down is within the Reshus HaYochid. What the animal does with it is not our problem. So that's clear. If you do not need roishay v'ruboy unless the person is holding the utensil. If he's holding the utensil, there's one of 2 options. Either he's also holding the animal, and then it's very secure. There's hardly a risk that the animal is going to drag the person with the utensil from the Reshus HaYochid into the Reshus HaRabim, because he's holding the animal very tight. However, if he's holding the utensil with the water and he's not holding the animal, then there's the risk that the animal may drag the utensil which the person is holding. That means the person is going to be following the utensil he's holding in his hand, and he's going to possibly by mistake take it out of the Reshus HaYochid into the Reshus HaRabim with the movements of the animal that are dragging it out. And that's seriously osa. However, if the animal is roishay v'ruboy within the Reshus HaYochid, we don't have that concern. We're not concerned that the animal is going to pull the water towards the Reshus HaRabim, because he is mostly in the Reshus HaYochid. Now, of the 2 cases, and we have to remember, in any case talking about that the person is holding the utensil. Otherwise, there's no problem. There's much more reason for concern when you're not holding the animal than when you are holding the animal. If you're holding the animal, there's much less risk of the animal pulling it away and causing the person to carry the utensil into the Reshus HaRabim than if he's not holding it. Now, there's a number of different combinations. The Mishnah said that Roshei v'Rubai, the animal must be Roshei v'Rubai in the Reshus HaYochid. That's why you need the two amis. Now, there's a few different options. One option is that in both cases, irrespective of whether you're holding the animal or not holding the animal, you need Roshei v'Rubai, and if you have Roshei v'Rubai, it suffices. There is a chance that it could be that when you're not holding the animal, that's when you need Roshei v'Rubai. When you are holding the animal, you do not need Roshei v'Rubai because you're holding the animal tight and there's no risk he's going to take it away. There's also the chance that when you're holding the animal, Roshei v'Rubai is enough. If you're not holding the animal, then even when it's Roshei v'Rubai, it will not be good enough. There's also the chance that when you're not holding, okay, we've incorporated all the different scenarios. Let's now see the Gemara inside. And just before we start the Gemara inside, there's two ways of approaching this topic, the different cases. There's one approach: do you need Roshei v'Rubai, or is it okay even without Roshei v'Rubai? That's one way of looking at it. There's another way of looking at it and saying, is Roshei v'Rubai enough, or is even Roshei v'Rubai not sufficient? And those are going to be two versions of the same Gemara. We're going to have the whole, half Amud, and then the Gemara is going to say Ikad Amra, another version, and is going to have the whole same Shakravataria, the same backwards and forwards, just not discussing whether you need Roshei v'Rubai, but discussing whether Roshei v'Rubai is sufficient. Let's see this inside. It's now going to be safe sailing, b'siyata d'shmaya. Gabe Adam ha'omar deboya Roshei v'Rubai. We saw explicitly that regarding a person, when he's drinking, he needs Roshei v'Rubai in the area where the utensil is that he's drinking from. Gabe para mi ba'inon lo Roshei v'Rubai. You'll notice the question is mi ba'inon. Do you need Roshei v'Rubai, or do you not even need Roshei v'Rubai? And it's clear that in some case you will need Roshei v'Rubai. It says that in the Mishnah. The question is, if in all cases, is it only when you're not holding the animal, and when you are holding the animal you don't even need it? Is it only when you are holding the animal, and when you're not holding the animal it doesn't even help Roshei v'Rubai? Or do you need it in both cases? That's going to be the discussion. Mi ba'inon lo Roshei v'Rubai, do you need Roshei v'Rubai, or not? So the Gemara starts like this: Kol heicha de kanokit mono v'lo nokit lo. If you're holding the utensil, and as we said before, if you're not holding the utensil, there's no discussion, you do not need Roshei v'Rubai. The Ritva says it explicitly. We're talking about that he's holding the utensil, the nokit mono. V'lo nokit lo, he's not holding the animal. Lo tiboy lecha, there I'm taking it for granted, the boya Roshei v'Rubai milegav. I need that Roshei v'Rubai should be inside the enclosed area, because you're not holding the animal. Ki tiboy lecha, when am I asking you whether you need Roshei v'Rubai? Heicha de nokit mono v'nokit lo. When I'm not only holding the utensil, but I'm also holding the animal tight, do I need Roshei v'Rubai then? Or no, since I'm holding the animal tight, I don't need Roshei v'Rubai. What's the halacha? Omerli. So he said to him, Tanisua, let's see what it says in our Mishnah. We learnt in the Mishnah, Ubelvacha tehei para Roshei v'Rubai mibifnim v'shoisa. It says explicitly in the Mishnah that there is a case that the animal has to be Roshei v'Rubai. My love, can we not take it for granted? The nokit lo v'nokit mono. It's talking about even in a case that you're holding the animal, you need Roshei v'Rubai. Says the Gemara lo. No, don't take that for granted at all. The nokit mono v'lo nokit lo. It could be the Mishnah is only talking about when you're not holding the animal, and that's why you need Roshei v'Rubai. When you're holding the animal, it could be that you do not need Roshei v'Rubai. Says the Gemara, so how are you now understanding that when you're holding the animal, you do not need Roshei v'Rubai? at all. When you're not holding the animal, then the Mishnah says you need rosh v'rubai. Says the Gemara, v'chinokit mono v'loy nokat lo. If you're holding the utensil and not holding the animal, mishori, you're saying that the Mishnah says that you have rosh v'rubai and that's enough? No. I'm going to bring you a brisa, and it seems from that brisa that there's a case where even if you have rosh v'rubai, it's not enough. And it certainly cannot be talking about when you're holding the animal, because then there's never a case that rosh v'rubai is good enough. And that can't be, because the Mishnah says explicitly there is a case that rosh v'rubai is good enough. So the Mishnah must be at least talking about when you're holding the animal. So the brisa that says that rosh v'rubai is not sufficient and doesn't even help must be talking about when you're not holding the animal. If the brisa says that when you're not holding the animal, even rosh v'rubai is not sufficient, it must be that the Mishnah that says that you need rosh v'rubai must be talking about that you are holding the animal. And then we have an answer to our question. Even when you're holding the animal, you need rosh v'rubai. Let's see this brisa inside. V'otanya. Lo yimale odom mayim. A person is not allowed to fill up a utensil with water. And we're talking here about within pasei birois. And we're talking about that the animal is rosh v'rubai within the parameter of these posts. And you're not v'yitain and hold the vessel and put it in front of the animal whilst you're holding the vessel. B'Shabbos lifnei behemta. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos in front of your animal. That means we have an explicit brisa that you're holding the utensil, the animal is rosh v'rubai inside, and you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. And it cannot be talking about that you're even holding the animal, because then what's the Mishnah talking about? When is rosh v'rubai good enough? If even when you're holding the animal, rosh v'rubai is not good enough, when is rosh v'rubai good enough in the Mishnah? So it must be that this brisa is talking about that you're not holding the animal. And the Mishnah is talking about that when you are holding the animal and you need rosh v'rubai. Not like we suggested a moment ago that the Mishnah is talking about when you're not holding the animal. If the Mishnah would be talking about that even when you're not holding the animal, rosh v'rubai is enough. When you are holding the animal, even that you don't need. In what case is the brisa correct? That with rosh v'rubai, you're not allowed to hold the utensil. There's no case that the brisa is going to be correct. What can you do? Says the brisa. Memalehu, you can fill up the utensil, v'shoifach, and pour out the water in front of the animal, and the animal can drink on its own. So we see explicitly from this brisa that there must be a case that rosh v'rubai doesn't help. It must be when you're not holding the animal. So it must be that the Mishnah that says rosh v'rubai does help is when you're holding the animal. So we have proof on the brisa. Omar Abai says no. It could be like we said before, that the Mishnah that says you need rosh v'rubai is talking about when you're not holding the animal. And when you are holding the animal, you don't even need rosh v'rubai. So when is it true what the brisa says that even rosh v'rubai doesn't help? Omar Abai said the brisa is talking about a completely different case. It's not talking about that you're holding a utensil filled with water whilst the animal is drinking it within the restraints of these pasei birois when the animal is rosh v'rubai in the area. That's not the case the brisa is talking about. It's talking about a totally new case. What's the brisa talking about, says Abaya? We're talking about that you have a Roshus HaYochid, a home, a bayis, a normal home. You have a Roshus HaRabim with a well in the middle, surrounded by pasei birois. Between the pasei birois and the home, you have a trough, an avos, which is something that the animal eats and drinks from. And this trough is a Roshus HaYochid in its own right. It's 4 tvachim wide and 10 tvachim high. So now you have this trough, which is going from the area between the posts of the pasei birois all the way till the house, and the animal is in the house. He's sticking his head out of the window and eating from the trough. So what was the discussion? Are you allowed to draw water from the well within the pasei birois? You're now holding a utensil of water in your hand. You're not really allowed to take it outside the pasei birois. But the halacha is, a person is allowed to stand in Roshus HaRabim and move something through a Rishus HaYochid. If he's standing on the edge of a Rishus HaYochid, even though he's standing in the Rishus HaRabim, he's allowed to carry something over the Rishus HaYochid, because he's not taken a utensil, an object, from one Rishus to another. So what's happening here? He's lifting up this jug of water. He's holding it above the trough, which is the Rishus HaYochid, taking it all the way to the animal and allowing the animal to drink. So we're not talking about the animals in the Pasei Berois. That Bryce has nothing to do with our sugya. Omar Abaya Hacha, we're talking about this. Bryce is talking about Ba'evus Oimid B'Rishus HaRabim, that a trough is standing in the Rishus HaRabim. Gavoya Sara Tvachim, it's 10 Tvachim high. V'roicha Varba, and it's 4 Tvachim wide. It's called a Rishus HaYochid. V'roishay Echod Nichnas Lebein HaPasim. One end of this trough, this Evus, is between the posts surrounding this well, and the other side is adjacent to the house where the animal is sticking its head out of the window. And the Brisa says you're not allowed to take this utensil to the animal, even though I'm never taking this utensil with water into Rishus HaRabim. It's constantly within Rishus HaYochid, first in the area surrounded by Pasei Berois, and then above the trough. No, it's still osa. Why? Maybe whilst you're traveling, whilst you're walking with this jug of water, holding the jug of water over the trough, you might suddenly realize that there's something, a blemish, a problem with the trough, and you're going to want to fix it. You're going to want to fix the trough, and you're going to forget that you're holding a kli, a utensil full of water. And he's going to take the jug of water by mistake and remove it from above the area of the trough and take it into the area of the Rishus HaRabim. Since we're afraid that, and if you do that, you've taken this vessel from Rishus HaYochid into Rishus HaRabim, we're afraid that's going to happen. And therefore, you're not allowed to take this vessel of water over the trough towards the animal. That's what the Brisa was talking about. Asks the Gemara, the rule is whenever you have a gezerah, the Chachomim were afraid of something happening, and therefore they didn't allow you to do something that could cause you to do that something else. The Chachomim only made their decree if the transgression that we're worried that you're going to do is a biblical one. If we're afraid that you're going to do a serious melacha, that you're going to be chayev for chayev chatos, the Chachomim said, don't do something else, because in order to help you avoid that situation. But if that situation itself is not chayev chatos, then the Chachomim would not have made a gezerah. Over here, if the Chachomim said, never carry a utensil over the trough, because if you find a problem with the trough and you're going to get carried away, you're going to end up carrying this vessel from the Rishus HaYochid above the trough into the Rishus HaRabim. Well, what if he does? If he does take it, is he chayiv min haTorah? No. So why are you saying that you're not allowed to do it initially? Why are you making a gezerah to prevent something that you wouldn't even be chayiv for min haTorah? Why would you not be chayiv for min haTorah? Says the Gemara, V'chihai gavna, if you were to get carried away and by mistake take this vessel from over the trough, or Rishus HaYochid, into the Rishus HaRabim, mi mechayev, would he be chayev chatos? Has he even done a melacha of hoitzah, which he's going to be chayev for? If he does it by mistake, he's going to be chayev chatos. V'ha'omar of Safra, Omar of Ami, Omar of Yochanan. It was said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Hamafane chafetzav mizovis lezovis. If a person is moving his own objects from one corner of his own home to another, it's a Rishus HaYochid, is perfectly legitimate. He's allowed to do that. V'nimlach, and then whilst he was holding them, whilst he was carrying his objects, he changed his mind alein on them. V'hoitzion, and he took them out into Rishus HaRabim. Potter is going to be potter. Why? We learnt in Mesechus Shabbos at great length. You're only chayev for taking something from one rishus to the other if you do an akira. You take it out of one, you lift it off one rishus, you take it into another rishus, you put it down in another rishus. You need all three elements of that melacha. Akira, ha'avara mirishus l'rishus, and hanocha has to be with the intentions of ma'avir mirishus l'rishus, moitzi mirishus l'rishus. Over here, when he lifted up the object, it was with the intentions of putting it down in the same house that he lifted them up in. He wasn't going to take them out of his house. Even if you afterwards take it out and put it down, you're not chayev, because the akira was not done with the intentions of doing a hitzah. His when he first lifted it up, it was not with the intentions of taking it out. So too here, when this person, when he lifted up this utensil, it was with the intentions of constantly keeping it over the Rishus HaYochid. So the akira was done without an intention of doing a hitzah. If by mistake he gets carried away and he takes it out, he's not going to be chayev, because the akira wasn't done with the intentions of doing hitzah. And if he's not going to be chayev, why were the chachomim so afraid, and why did they make this precaution to not even allow you to take this utensil to the animal in fear that you might do something that even if you do it, you won't be chayev? Says the Gemara, Elo Zimnin, that you're right. We're not afraid, or what made the Chachomim say you're not allowed to take this utensil to the animal was not that we were afraid you were going to take the utensil into the Rishus Harabim. You're right, because in that case he wouldn't be chayev, because when he first lifted up the utensil, it was not with the intention of carrying it into another Rishus. However, we're afraid of something else. Let's say indeed you saw something wrong with the trough. You got carried away and you took out this vessel and you put it down in the Rishus Harabim. You took care of the trough and did whatever you had to do. Now, whilst you're carried away, you're going to lift up this vessel with water and put it back into the Rishus HaYochid. You're going to take it back to the animal. Here, when you're lifting it off the Rishus Harabim, it's with the intentions of bringing it to Rishus HaYochid. And this is very seriously asa, because here you'll have done the akira with the intentions of doing a hitzah mirshus l'rshus. And that's very seriously asa, and therefore the Chachamim said that you shouldn't move the water and take it over the trough, which is itself in Rishus Harabim, towards the animal. Let's see this inside. He's going to fix whatever needs fixing on the trough, and then he's going to again bring back in this utensil. You'll have carried from Rishus Harabim into Rishus HaYochid, which is seriously asa. Therefore the Chachamim said it was asa. And since this brisa is not talking about feeding an animal with the water whilst the animal is itself within the pasei birois, roishiv ruboy in the pasei birois, you cannot bring proof from this brisa to our discussion. And then we're back to what we said initially. It could be that when the Mishnah said that you need roishiv ruboy, it's only when the animal is not being held. It could well be that when the animal is being held, you do not even need roishiv ruboy within the Rishus HaYochid. That was the first version of this Gemara. Continues the Gemara, Ikka de Omra, we're going to have another version of the same Gemara. Gabe Odom ha'ka'omrinon desagi leiberoishev ruboy. We saw regarding a human being that it's enough, it's sufficient for him to have roishev ruboy, his head and most of his body in the area where the utensil he's drinking from, and that's sufficient, as we saw regarding the press, the gas, and as we saw if somebody wants to drink on Shabbos with his feet in Rishus Harabim and his utensil of water in Rishus HaYochid, or vice versa, we know that it's sufficient to have roishev ruboy. Gabi paro mi sagi lo b'roishev ruba. Here the question is a bit different. It's not mi ba'inon, do we need roishev ruboy? We take it for granted that with less than roishev ruboy, of course you're not allowed to hold the utensil whilst feeding the animal. The question is, if you have roishev ruboy, is it sufficient? Or do we say no? Even if you have roishev ruboy, it's not sufficient. We're still afraid that the animal is going to cause the person to carry the utensil outside the restraints of the Rishus HaYochid. That was the question. Misagi lo b'roishev ruba oiloi. And the Gemara is saying, Heicha de nokit mono v'nokit lo. If you're holding the animal, you're not only holding the utensil, you're also holding the animal. Lo tiboy lecha. Then it's taken for granted the sagila, b'roishev ruba. You're holding the animal tight, and the roishev ruba of the animal is within the Rishus HaYochid. You have nothing to worry about. It's enough. My question was, denokit mono v'loy nokit lo. If you're holding the utensil, but you're not holding the animal, in that case, there's more of a risk of the animal causing the person to follow it out into Rishus Harabim. Is roishev ruba at all enough? Or do we say that even roishev ruba is insufficient? What's the halacha? Omar le, nisua. So again, the Gemara is saying, let's go and see what it says in our Mishnah. We saw in the Mishnah, the Mishnah says explicitly that there is a case that Roishay V'Ruboy is enough. You need 2 amos, and then if the animal is with Roishay V'Ruboy, you're allowed to hold the utensil and give it to drink. My love, can we not take it for granted that it's talking about even when you're not holding the animal and Roishay V'Ruboy is sufficient? Says the Gemara, lo, you can't take that for granted at all. Maybe the Mishnah is talking about that you're holding the animal. If you're holding the animal, that's when it's sufficient. If you're not holding the animal, even Roishay V'Ruboy doesn't help. It's logical that the Mishnah that says you can rely or that it's enough to have Roishay V'Ruboy is talking about when you're holding the animal. Because if the Mishnah was talking about that you're holding the utensil and you're not holding the animal, and even there it's going to be enough to have Roishay V'Ruboy mishori, can it be that the Mishnah says that you're allowed to rely on Roishay V'Ruboy if you're not holding the animal? V'hotanya. This seems to contradict what we learned in the Brisa. The Brisa we saw before. You're not allowed to fill up a utensil with water and hold it in front of the animal, and the animal is Roishay V'Ruboy, it's not sufficient. You can fill up the utensil, spill it in front of the animal, and the animal will drink on its own. From that Brisa, you see explicitly that there's a case that it doesn't work. Even if you have Roishay V'Ruboy, it doesn't work. So it must be that if it's talking about that you're not holding the animal. If you're not holding the animal, even Roishay V'Ruboy doesn't work. If you're holding the animal, that's when the Mishnah says Roishay V'Ruboy is enough. Says the Gemara, don't bring me proof from that Brisa at all to tell us that it's logical that if you're not holding the animal, it doesn't work at all, because the Brisa is talking about a completely different case, as we saw before. Abai explained the Brisa was talking about a different scenario. Exactly the same as we saw before. We do not need to elaborate on the whole thing again. We're talking about you have a trough going between the area enclosed and the home. The Zimnin de Chazi Leila Evos were afraid that if he's going to take the vessel over the trough, he's going to see there's something wrong with the Evos, the Mekalkel, it's got ruined. V'osil it's kune, he's going to want to fix it. V'dori leile davlo bahadei, he's going to take the vessel with him into the Rishus Harabim. V'komapik Rishus Hayochid Rishus Harabim, and therefore, since we're afraid he's going to take this vessel from the Rishus Hayochid into Rishus Harabim, therefore we say you're not allowed to take the vessel to the animal. All you can do is you can fill up this trough with water whilst you're still in the Pasei Birois. Don't take the vessel out of the Pasei Birois. Fill up the trough, the avos, and then the animal will drink on its own. The water will reach the other side of the trough, and the animal will drink it on its own. You must not take out this kli out of the Pasei Birois, even though you're intending to just hold the vessel over the Rishus Hayochid. Ask the Gemara, even if you did take the kli from the Rishus Hayochid into the Rishus Harabim, would you be chayev? V'omer of Safra, Omer of Ami, Omer of Yechanon, Hamafane chafetz of mizavis lezavis, if somebody is carrying his objects from one corner of the home to the other, v'nimlech aleim, and whilst in transit he changed his mind and decided v'itzion to take them out, Potter, it's going to be Potter, shelo hoyso akira misha rishono lekach, because when he lifted up originally did the akira, when he lifted up the object, it was not with the intentions of taking it out. So too here, if he didn't intend to take it into Rishus Harabim, even if by mistake he does, he won't be chayev. If he won't be chayev, why were the Chachamim taking the extra precaution not to let you do this? Elo says the Gemara, Zimnin de Mesakin le, we're not worried about the fact that he's taking it out. We're even more worried for the fact that after he fixes the trough, V'hodor ma'ayele is going to bring the utensil back into the area of the Rishus Hayochid. V'kom ma'ayele Rishus Harabim Rishus Hayochid. Since when he lifts it off the Rishus Harabim, he is intending to bring it back into Rishus Hayochid, and that's going to be a proper hitzah mirishus to Rishus. To avoid that, the Chachamim said, don't take the vessel outside the area of the Pasei Birois. Continues the Gemara Toshema. Gomol sheroishay v'ruboy mibifnim. In camel that is roishay v'ruboy within a Rishus Hayochid, oivsin oisay mibifnim. Oivsin means to force feed. they were afraid when they would go on long journeys with the camels, they would not have enough food. They would force the camels to eat a lot of food to the point that their stomachs would become widened, that their stomachs themselves would take the shape, so to speak, of a trough full of food. That's called oiv senoisoi. So oiv senoisoi mibifnim. You're allowed to force feed the animal and force it to eat to the extent that it's called oiv sin. And over here it's clearly talking about that you're holding the food, you're holding a utensil that you're forcing it with. You must be holding the collar around the animal's neck. You must be holding the animal, otherwise you would not be able to force feed it. So we're talking here about where you're holding the utensil and you're holding the animal. It's compared to holding the animal, not only the utensil. And it says explicitly that the gomel, this camel, has to be roishe v'rubai inside. So you see clearly that even when you're holding the animal, that it has to be roishe v'rubai inside. And we'll remember that the first version of the Gemara was a discussion whether you need roishe v'ruba, and the Gemara said that maybe you only need roishe v'ruba when you're not holding the animal. When you're holding the animal, you don't even need roishe v'ruba. Here we have an explicit brisa that seems to say that even when you're holding the animal, you need roishe v'ruba. Omer of Achabar, of Huna, Omer of Sheshes, Shani, Gomel. You're right, and over here it's different, because here it's a camel. Hoil v'tzavore oruch, a camel has a very long neck, and therefore it's much easier, even if you're holding the animal, it's much easier for the camel to make a small twist of his neck, and then the person will be encouraged to follow its head outside into the Rishus Harabim. And therefore you need roishe v'rubai. But it could well be that a regular animal that does not have such a long neck, then even roishe v'rubai would not be necessary if you're holding the animal. Toshima. We have an explicit brisa. Behema sheroisha v'ruba bifnim. Now we're not mentioning a camel. We're talking about an animal that his head is roisha v'ruba inside the Rishus Hayachid. Oiv senoisam bifnim. You're allowed to force feed it. So you see here clearly, v'ha'ovus, to force feed must be commanded nokat mono v'nokit lo. You have to be holding the animal, not only the utensil, v'kaba'inan roisha v'ruba, and you need roisha v'ruba. And here it doesn't mention the camel, so you see explicitly that even when you're holding the animal, you need roishe v'rubai. Says the Gemara, no. My behema, do you know what the brisa means when it says behema? My behema nami diktoni gomel. It's talking about only a camel that has a very long neck. Asks the Gemara, v'tanya behema v'tanya gomel. We have one brisa that says gomel, and another brisa that says behema. Can we not assume that when it says behema, it doesn't mean gomel? Says the Gemara, if the two brises would have been one brisa, would have been said together, then you're right. Gomel is not behema, behema is not gomel. But here they're two totally independent brises. They were not said in connection to each other. So it could be that the brisa is saying the same halacha. In one place it calls the gomel a gomel, and in one place it just refers to the gomel as a behema. But it could well be that behema means gomel. Midi gabi adodi Tanya? Are the two brises written next to each other? Tanya Namihochi, we have another brisa that also proves this point, that a camel is different to other animals. Rebbe Lezer Oyser, even though the Chachomim say that you need roishe v'rubai, and that means even if you're holding the camel, you need roishe v'rubai. Other animals, if you're holding the animal, you do not need roishe v'rubai. Rebbe Lezer Oyser begomel. Rebbe Lezer says that regarding a camel, even if you're holding it, roishe v'rubai will not be good enough, because it has such a long neck and it's so easy for it to pull away and cause the person holding the utensil to drag the utensil or let it go to the Rishus Harabim. Hoil v'tzavora oruch, since its neck is very long, and therefore regarding a camel, the Rebbe Lezer is even more machmir than the Chachomim. The Chachomim say you need roishe v'rubai. Rebbe Lezer says even roishe v'rubai is not good enough with a camel. So even though Rebbe Lezer is arguing with the Chachomim, we see explicitly from Rebbe Lezer that there's a different halacha by camels than other animals. And this is proof to the way we learnt that animals that don't have such a long neck are different to camels, and it could well be that if you're holding the animals, if it's not a camel, even roishe v'rubai will not be necessary at least according to the Chachomim. At least according to the Chachomim. There is a number of different ways of learning this Gemara, but this is the way Rashi seems to learn. And in Mirz Hashem, in the next Shir, we're going to continue from here.